All right, I am so happy to have you come on this new podcast, How She Led to Me, which I started to talk to Washington men and women, but so far only women, about the women in their lives who have really had the biggest impact. And I wanted to talk to Dr. Lindsay Chervinsky, who I met a few years ago as a fellow author. She's a historian. She is a presidential historian. She's the executive director of the George Washington Presidential Library. And I was lucky enough to go out there for an event at Mount Vernon, which was wonderful. And you've written two books I know of,
Mhm.
Making the Presidency about John Adams and the Precedents that Forged the Republic, and The Cabinet, which is an amazing book too, George Washington and the Creation of an American Institution. So relevant and important to right now, the moment that we're in on this 250th. So thank you so much for coming
Yeah,
on, and it's good to
absolutely.
see you.
It's good to
Um,
see you.
what do you, first off, before I ask you who your inspirations are, what do you make of this? This is a light question, right? Of this 250th anniversary
Uh,
and this moment we're in.
yeah, well, in some ways, it feels very consistent with American history because if we look at the past 50th and the 100th and the 150th and the 200th, they tend to come in moments where, like, the nation is in peaks of uncertainty. Maybe that specific day isn't a particularly bad one, but, 1826 came after the first real sectional crisis where the Missouri Compromise temporarily solved the issue of slavery, but it was very much on everyone's minds and all of the founding generation was dying off. So there were these real questions about whether or not the nation would work without them as a bulwark. And then, of course, 1976, the nation had just come out of Watergate and Vietnam, and trust was so low in institutions. Their inflation was really high. There had been all this political violence in the 1960s, and so in some ways that's like very comforting, like, it's okay that we're kind of in a rough spot here because we've certainly done that before and seem to have a tendency to do that every 50 years or so. I think a lot of it is still too soon to say because so much of the impact of the 1976 celebration was the cultural focus, the work, the scholarship, the books, all of the things that were inspired by it that came after it. And so we still need to kind of see what the legacy of this moment is to fully assess the anniversary. But, you know, every museum that I know of is having a 250th exhibit of some variety. Every organization I know is doing something. Every advertisement I hear is 250 related. So I am hopeful that there is at least a bit of saturation, even if it is very fragmented and local in how we are thinking about it.
I like this optimistic view because it does feel like this is more chaotic than
Yeah.
what we weren't here, but obviously what we have read and know of the
The
Bible.
thing is, though, in 1976, people at the time were like, this is a hot mess. This is a complete cluster. There's no organization, there's no centralization. The main committee was a disaster. But yet people have such positive memories. So I am hopeful that some of that will trickle down over time.
Okay. Well, then this is a great segue to what what woman in your life has given you that optimistic outlook? Because I want to
Well,
know.
I do yeah, I do have to fight for the optimism, I will say, like, I choose it because I think that apathy, is really the enemy of optimism, and apathy is the goal of people who are trying to tear down democratic institutions and democratic ideals, and so for me, optimism is a conscious choice, even if sometimes I'm like, seriously?
Oh,
No, it's a conscious choice. Um, the What's interesting is so the person who I think actually gave me that optimism is my mom, but so much of who my mom is shaped by my grandmother. And so my grandmother is the person that I chose today. And in some ways, my mom and my grandmother were very different people, but there are really key through lines that came down to my generation that are essential in terms of shaping me and what I'm doing.
yeah. Where did you grow up? Like, what was your childhood like? I think that's
Yeah.
important to the conversation. Yeah.
It is. So I grew up in California. I grew up east of San Francisco. I have a younger sister and two older brothers, and they're much older than me, which very much shapes my identity because I am both the oldest daughter. So all of those memes about eldest daughter, 100% accurate.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
100% accurate. But also, I'm completely shaped by the fact that I have two much older brothers. So my sense of humor is permanently that of a 12-year-old boy. And that is because I have these older brothers and like grew up watching sports and going to sports games all the time. My dad was really into sports. So, very much shaped by that family dynamic. My mom's family is from upstate New York, however, like middle of nowhere, upstate New York. When I first took my husband there, I joked, I was like, there are more cows than people. Like you need to know we are going in the middle of nowhere. And I think we used to go there every year, sometimes twice a year, and that was extremely formative, both in terms of how I thought about things. Like I was never expecting to stay in California all the time because we did a lot of travel, but also my mom was not Californian by birth. And so she really thought nationally, and she thought it was really important to experience different places and to go different places at different parts of your life, especially for college, because that's what her mom had encouraged her to do. And so I think that that sort of bi-coastal, I should say, it is very much bi-coastal. We do tend to be
Yeah.
coastal elitists,
Yep.
but at least not just California.
Yeah. Where did your mom end up going to school? Where did you end up going to school?
So she went to Ohio. She went to Denison in college, and then I went to George Washington University in DC. That's when I came here for my eighth grade school trip, and I fell in love with DC, and I came back for college. And I have since lived a lot of other places, but it was it in sort of Northern Virginia was always clearly destined to be home.
Mhm.
And my dad jokes that my mom, when she was pregnant with me, was like whispering, like, "Go to the East Coast for college." Not a particular school, just like go somewhere else, see
Yeah.
something new. And that worked. Both my sister and I went to the East Coast for college.
It does feel like some people can live their whole lives in California. I mean, California is like its own
Most.
country
Yes.
in a way.
Yes. Yes.
It's insular in some ways. So it feels to me like, was your grandmother and your mom, did they both love to read and travel and all of the things that make you, I think the best thing about reading is that curiosity and traveling
Yes.
too, and wanting to get out of your tiny town,
Yes.
you
Well, I
know?
think that curiosity is such a great word for it because they were both very, intellectually curious. They asked amazing questions. My grandmother was, and my mom still is. Like, I joke that my mom can talk to a wall because she just can ask questions of anyone, and I think it comes from a genuine place of wanting to learn.
Yeah.
And so my grandmother had this rule, which my mom then adopted, which was anytime the family went anywhere on a trip, there had to be at least one educational or historic experience.
Wow.
And so you could be going to a beach vacation, but they were going to find a museum or they were going to find a historic site. It did not matter. And there was a lot of whining about this when
I
I
was
was a
gonna
kid.
say, what did your brothers think of this?
There was a lot of whining.
Yeah.
We all whined, and my mom whined when she was a kid. They didn't want to do this either. That meant sometimes that we went to some like wackadoodle places because mom was like, "We're in Hawaii. I don't care. We're finding something."
Mhm.
And we're in Boston to go look at colleges. We're doing the Freedom Trail, and I don't care that it's snowing. We're doing it because that's the plan. But I talk about how formative that was because I have this picture of myself when I was 6 at Jamestown. My sister was 4, and we're both wearing the steel helmets and the armor that you can put on when you're there. And I mean, I was a voracious reader. Growing up, I read a ton of historical fiction, but I think actually seeing the living spaces is what unlocks your imagination and what makes it come alive. And certainly travel does that too, seeing how other communities live, seeing how other countries live. And that was something that my grandmother insisted upon for my mom, and my mom insisted upon for us. And now, when I'm out doing talks, people will say, "How can I get my kids interested in history?" And I say, take them to places where they can actually experience it because it just is so much more powerful.
And you do that at Mount Vernon every
We do.
day. right? It's
Yes,
like
yes.
kind
They'll we call it like a living history site because you can of course see the house, you can see
of
the furniture, you can see the clothing, but you can also see the blacksmith shop. You can see the farm, you can see the animals, and I think that there's just something so much more tangible about seeing how the space shapes people that we can relate to because we obviously live in space too. And so that intellectual curiosity, I do think, comes from them and the desire to see and learn about different people and different places. Even though my grandmother lived in upstate New York her entire life in this tiny town, they did travel a lot and thought it was and read a ton and thought it was really important.
I think it's so true because we went to, now the name escapes me, but Winston Churchill's home outside of Oxford. We brought our
Mm,
kids
mhm.
there. And like the part that they liked the best was the kitchen. And, you're in
Yeah,
this palatial
yeah,
palace. Um, and it's the relationship that you have to like the
yeah,
everyday that it
yes.
really connects people. Um, do you think like there's something I think unique about you in that you occupy you're really living in a man's world in some ways, and
Mhm.
I we have spoken about that
Yeah.
offline together. What gives you the confidence to step into those spaces,
Mhm.
say your opinion? You exude a lot of confidence. I know that that's probably a hard fought thing to do, right?
Thank you. Yeah, well, initially, the confidence, I think, was a little bit of fake it till you make it.
Yes.
Now there aren't too many rooms that I walk into where I'm, like, actually intimidated. I mean, there are people that I'm like, "Wow, this is an amazing
Yeah.
person," but the room doesn't really intimidate me. Um, so I joke that on both sides, I come from a long line of very feisty women who and it's my grandmother's such a good example of this. She, in some ways, was extraordinarily traditional. She was Catholic. She was very devout. She went to church every week. She got married relatively young. She had 4 children. She stayed at home while they were young. She then went and helped at work with her husband's company. But there were things about her that also totally put that model on its head. So she went to Cornell before women went to Cornell.
Wow.
And it was a double major in French and linguistics. Unfortunately, she did not pass language skills down to me. I'm like, oh, come on, like that's such a good skill. Did not. And she had this amazing scholarship that she could have continued to get a master's and PhD. Basically, the scholarship would continue as long as she continued in school. And at the time, my grandfather had gone into the Navy, and then he was in college at Carnegie Mellon,
Oh,
and when he got out, they got married. So she got her degree, but then she stopped and she went and she had babies. And so in some ways she was like extraordinarily traditional, but also totally defied expectations in terms of education, in terms of her belief that like women deserved education. In this little town, my mom used to tell this story that they my mom was one of 3 girls, and then there was a younger boy. So she's one of 4. And her parents, my grandmother and grandfather, used to be the only parents in the bleachers for the girls' games because it was girl sports. Who cared? And they were determined that their daughters would do sports, their daughters would have experiences, their daughters would go to college. So all of them went to college. And my family believes in investing in education. It's a really important part of our sort of like financial planning. And so my grandparents paid for my parents' college, my parents paid for my college, and it's just like it's a very important part of our ethos. But there was this deep and abiding sense that like it did not matter if you were a woman, you were equal, you could be just as smart, you could be just as intelligent, and that was absolutely passed down. My like firmest memories growing up of the dinner table was being encouraged to participate in debate, and I could have whatever opinion I wanted. I just had to back it up.
wow.
And my dad's a lawyer, my brother's a lawyer, my husband's a lawyer. So, you know, that actually meant you had to really debate because they like
Yeah.
they don't let you win.
Yeah.
And then when I was starting, I had planned to be a lawyer too, which I at the very last minute
Really?
took a 180. I applied to LSAT, I applied to law schools, I took the LSATs, I got into a bunch of places, and then at the last moment I decided not to. But in the lead up to
Aren't
that,
you
I
so
had
glad
done,
you did? Aren't
oh
you
my
so
God,
glad you
thank
did?
God.
Right?
'Cause I watched my husband go through it, and I would rather stick needles in my eyeballs.
Yeah.
I just like
Uh,
horrific.
yes.
but I did mock trial for 8 years, 4 years in high school and 4 years in college, and my dad coached my high school team, and I think this tradition of both parents being very committed to girls' equality of experience continued because my dad was at almost every sports game. He was at every, musical theater recital. He coached mock trial. And I think that activity gave me an enormous amount of confidence because all of it was about public speaking and it was about thinking on your feet, but it was also inherently sort of competitive and putting your intellectual abilities against the others. And my dad loved it when I would school the men. He loved it when I would school the boys. He thought it was the greatest thing in the world. And so I think there was just this sort of family tradition of you can do both very traditional things and you can also totally defy expectations if you want to.
I think that's incredible, by the way, that your grandmother went to Cornell.
Yeah,
And I mean,
unbelievable.
because I mean, you're younger than I am, but my grandmother didn't go to neither of my well, my grandmother on my dad's side didn't go to college because I mean, at the time,
Women didn't.
it just women didn't unless you are, going to more of like a finishing school if you were
Yeah.
upper class. And I think that there must be stories that your grandmother told you where people kind of, and there also must be the I think of this too because I have 3 kids and I'm always sort of trying to balance it all, like, the sacrifice she made not to pursue a
Yeah.
career
Yeah.
is something that has probably stuck with you, and it sticks with everybody.
Mhm.
Like, do I want to I mean, there are many times, and I said this when I was talking to Brooke Baldwin, it's like, I will say to my mom, "This just isn't fair. Why does this fall on me?" And she says, "Life's not fair." Because
Mhm.
you as the mother, you are the one getting the emails. You are the for party
Mhm.
invitations and all that kind of intellectual work that
Mhm.
takes up space in your mind. Did
Mhm.
you see your grandmother have regret? Not that she would express regret, but maybe wish.
Yeah, I don't know that she did. I mean, what is and I should say, like, I haven't mentioned my grandfather much, but he was extraordinary, and he's the only person that I've ever met who, when they died, like, genuinely everyone liked them. Like, he was such
Mhm.
a good person, such a good person, and it was not fake. It was like he and my grandmother just were such pillars of this little community, and he was always kind, and he was always thoughtful, and he was so funny. But they had a true partnership, like, they really were equals, and I asked him once, because I think their marriage is sort of, what I would aspire to. I asked him, like, what was the secret, and he said respect. Respect is the secret. Like, you have to respect the other person because everything else can kind of fade or change or evolve over time. But as long as you respect the other person, you're going to at least try to treat them with civility. Um, and he also said, "Don't cheat," which I thought was pretty funny.
Good advice.
But he started with respect,
Yeah,
which was good.
yeah.
Um, and so, like, he went out and he built this business. And so then after the kids were in school, she went and she worked with him. And he had this insurance company in town, and she went and she worked. And I think that he obviously encouraged her to do that. He encouraged her. She was incredibly active in the community. She was, like, on every board, every committee, everything you can imagine. Did all of this, local fundraising, did all of these organizing things. So I think she found a lot of outlets for her intellectual powers, and she found a way to stay busy. She did always read. She played bridge until, like, a month before she died. She was very involved in a local community college. And so I think there were ways that she found to make a difference, and she believed in making a difference. But I don't know that today she would make the same choices because I think she would have felt like she had more options, that she could have maybe gotten a graduate degree and also had kids, which was not an option back then, really.
Mhm.
And so I don't think she regretted it because she did love her. I mean, she loved the family. They loved the family. They loved the whole mess of it. And it got to be a big family because they had
Yeah.
4 kids and they had kids, and so they enjoyed that very much. And they, I think, saw that as their legacy. But I do think today it's possible she would have made different choices just because she was so intellectual and she was so smart and so constantly interested, that she also was like, so yeah, so I brought a picture of her
Oh yeah,
and she,
props. Yes,
props. So this is her. This was my sister's wedding.
I love that.
She was this like tiny little Spitfire, and when she like um, the last year of her life, well, most of her life, she weighed like 98
I was
pounds.
gonna say
She was tiny,
tiny
tiny.
lady.
Yeah, like
Yes,
I make her look. I look huge next to her, and I'm 5'3". Um, Tiny lady, but, like, so disciplined.
classy.
Like,
Yeah.
yes, she got up every morning at 6 AM, she was on the treadmill. She was on the treadmill until 2 weeks before she died.
What?
Yes, like, on the treadmill. Then she would get dressed. She had, like, original Pendleton skirts. She always dressed to the nines. She always dressed amazing, and she was just, like, so disciplined, and she loved a challenge, and she was so stubborn. And so I think that she would have probably seen education as a way to like flex that
Gosh.
stubbornness of like, I will have family and I will have
Yeah.
children and I will also do this.
Yes. Oh my God, I love her style. Did she pass that down to your mom? Like, who has those Pendleton skirts now? Oh,
I do. Yes.
nice.
I did have to let some of them out a little bit because I am not 98 pounds. But yes, when she passed away, we the family was really thoughtful about what to do with all of because she loved, I mean, she just really treasured her home and her things. I have a beautiful like corner hutch that's antique that they got in Williamsburg in the 1970s. It was from the 1790s in
Wow.
my office at home, which is hanging on the wall, which is stunning. She loved going to historic sites too. So prop number two is she has this George and Martha from when they came to Mount Vernon. She had like hundreds of these carolers. She had holiday ones. She had all these other ones, and so I have the George and Martha ones that are in my work office.
Perfect
Um,
for you.
and then, there were some things I had given her that I took back. And then a lot of the clothes, my sister and I went through the clothes. My sister doesn't dress in a formal and doesn't work in a formal environment, so she had much less use for it. But I have some of her blazers, I have some of her scarves, and I have some of her Pendleton skirts.
When did she pass away? Did she get to see you?
2020. Yes,
Okay.
when she died, she had the cabinet in her purse,
Oh,
which is
yeah.
amazing. Yeah.
That is
And I mean, she to her
amazing.
she so my grandfather died in what was it? Was it 2012? I think it was 2012, and he had had Parkinson's for a very long time. And she was so devoted to him. And so after that, she did travel a lot. My mom took her to Italy and they went to Rome because she'd never been to Rome, but was a devout Catholic. So that was wonderful. She got to see a lot of family. She did a lot of travel in that way. And she lived in her own home by herself until 2 weeks before she died. And she I'm so grateful that she had this experience because she got really sick, she got pneumonia, but she had a moment where she was doing okay, and she got to have conversations with the entire family, and when I
Mhm.
had a conversation with her, I talked about how special she was to me because there are things about me that make me a little bit of a black sheep in the family, and they're a little bit odd, and I think she shares some of them, and, um, to tell her how much I appreciated her and how valuable she was to me. And she, said how much she appreciated that and agreed, and that she had no regrets because she had done everything she wanted to do and had an amazing life and an amazing marriage, an amazing family, and she died the next day.
Oh my god. That's a beautiful thing to have, like, that
Yeah,
moment.
it
Most people
was,
don't get that.
yeah.
Mhm,
And so I
mhm.
really encourage people, like, if there are things that you're like, oh, that's kind of corny. I don't know if I can say that. Like, say it. I'm so glad I got to say it. And so that was, if you can choose how to go, I think that's the way to do it.
She sounds like an incredible person, and that she
Yes.
has such a and that she lives on. I mean, I think that that's one of the things, like, in what you're doing now, you know,
Mhm.
there are things that you're doing every day in your work, sharing American history, sharing
Mhm.
the personalities and relationships among the founding fathers and all of that, that she probably
Yeah.
would have loved. I think you've got
Oh,
are there I
absolutely.
mean, there's no better story than to go to your grandmother, right? As the person
Yeah.
that, like, made
Yeah.
you who you are. Um, is there is there anything you'd want to say before we wrap up about your mom? Because I always think that like
Mm,
the grandmother relationship is
mhm,
easier for a lot of people.
mm,
The mom
mhm.
relationship is more fraught, and we love our moms, right? But
Yes,
um,
yes.
is that true for you?
Yeah. No, I mean, well, no, I mean, I've been, I think that what some people experience, we've, always been really close, and I give my mom enormous credit because we are very different people, and so,
Mhm.
I think that closeness was possible because she worked so hard to accept me being a totally different person, in every way, including, like, my entire family is blonde. Like, all the women in my family are blonde and tan,
Really?
and I am neither of those things. I'm a almost, like, spitting replica of my dad's mom, which is a very interesting grandmother dynamic.
Yeah.
But so, like, physically, my sister is a clone of my mother, and I look nothing like either of them, except for we're all short, but that's it. In terms of, like, personality, she's so outgoing. As I said, she could talk to a wall. She can make anyone feel welcome and comfortable. I am a very intense introvert. I'm an outgoing introvert, but I'm
Really?
a very intense introvert. And I was very shy growing up. I had to work really hard to overcome those things.
Wow.
And I often, when I'm like in a situation, I'm like, God, I don't know what to say here. I will often think, what will my mom say? How would she handle the situation? And it's such a helpful guide to like either be empathetic in a really difficult situation or how to make a conversation, which I
Mhm.
do now a lot because I meet so many people
Yes.
and like that small talk piece when you're at a reception or dinner, it does not come naturally to me. And she's great at it. And so I'm always like, okay, what would she say? And that is a really helpful guide. Um,
I would
but
never
I think
ever have thought that, by the way. You seem really comfortable speaking to. Is there any advice you would give to people other than if they don't know your mom and can't say.
yes. Okay. So what so there's a couple of things you could say. Like so if you don't have my mom as an example, you could say, how would someone like you could think like how would someone who's really comfortable in these situations, like how would they approach it? So that's one way. So you don't have to think like what should I say? You would think, what would they say? When I was trying to build up my comfort with networking and walking into a room where I didn't know anyone, what I set for myself was a rule of three. I had to have three meaningful interactions and then I could flee if I wanted to. If I was having a good time, I could stay, but I was permitted to flee once I had the three meaningful interactions. They don't have to be long conversations. They can be a 2-minute conversation where you walk up and you introduce yourself and you say to someone like, I really admire your work. Thank you so much for what you're doing. Here's who I am. Like, just wanted to say it's nice to
Yeah.
meet you. That's enough. That's a great conversation. You can leave. That's a meaningful interaction. So
Check the
that's the
box.
second, yeah, check box.
Yeah.
And sometimes even now, like, not that I'm intimidated, but if I'm like, oh, I don't really want to go to this, but I know I should, I will still use the rule of three of like, once you've done the three, then you're allowed to leave. And then the last thing I would say is people, it doesn't matter how famous they are, like it is always nice to hear, "I love your work." It is always nice to hear, "I really admired this thing that you did," whether it was, something you
Mhm.
wrote or something you, said on a podcast, and you can prepare for that. So if you know that, like, you're going to an event and you're hearing someone speak and you wanna introduce yourself, but you're worried you don't know what to say, go listen to their recent podcast or go look at the recent article they've read and say, I loved this podcast you did. It's a natural opening for them to say, oh, yeah, this was such a fun conversation, or I love the podcast or something. People like praise. It's a very simple, I mean, it's a very human thing. And so those would be my tricks think about what someone else would do in the situation, rule of three, and then you can prepare just a little bit. And that always helps.
I think the rule of 3 is gonna be my new favorite thing because I
It's
always
so
find
helpful.
myself. Yeah, I just find myself sort of because I have some of that, like, "Get me out of here," like,
Mhm.
at
Mhm.
social some social events, and if
Mhm.
you can just feel like you've done it. I will say the last part that you said is interesting because I do try to do that. And I did that with David Rubenstein recently, and he's so amazing. But like, I felt like I was just like he was so he's so brilliant, and what his work is incredible. He gave these remarks at an event I was at for the Trust for the National Mall, and I went up to him and just said, "I'm that was incredible. You did that off the cuff," and he was like, "Thank you." But so there is kind of a like I always feel like sometimes when you're praising people, it comes across as too fawning, but I do think people always like appreciate it. You don't have to gush, but
Yeah.
you can just say that
Well,
was
and I
great.
think if you can be specific, like I find,
Right.
not just like, "Oh, I love you, I'm such a huge fan," but if
Yes.
you say like, "I really enjoyed this one thing you did," then
Yes.
it's less like I wanna be a fangirl, and it's more like, "I really appreciate your work in this way." Because it also gives them something to latch onto in their response, as opposed to
Mhm.
just saying like, "Thank you so much." It gives like a place for the conversation to go. And not that I am in any way near that tier, but like when I'm doing talks and people come up
Yeah.
to me, if
Yeah.
they give me something to like build off of, I try to continue the conversation. And that's helpful. And so I think that that is a good way to do it.
Yeah, that brings me to another moment when I said to David McCullough, like, "I'm such a huge fan," and he said, "You're not so big," or something like that. I'm like, such a huge fan, and that's a fan moment, like, fangirl moment where you're kind of like,
Yeah.
I didn't say, "I loved in the Brooklyn Bridge when you wrote about such and
Yeah.
such," which probably would have continued the conversation,
Yeah.
so, uh
Well, yeah. And I think that the challenge also is sometimes to remember that if you have a weird interaction with someone, it's not necessarily about you. Like, you never know either if they're a bit odd, which sometimes they are.
yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant people can be odd.
Yeah,
And
people
or
are
maybe they're having a weird day, or maybe something else has happened, or maybe they just had a strange conversation, or whatever it is. So like, don't allow a weird interaction to be off-putting for those types for like future conversations,
yeah.
because I think most people who do a lot of public engagement really try to give their A game every time they show up, but no one can be 100% all the time.
No, I completely agree with that, and I'm just blown away that you're an introvert. If I'm gonna take anything away from this conversation, that is not how I would have pegged you at all. You are so comfortable.
Well,
Um,
thank you. My colleagues know that there are times where I'm like, "No more people are allowed." I'm like, "I'm going home. Too many people. I just
I
cannot anymore."
completely feel that way. Is there anything else you'd wanna say about your mom and or your grandmother before we wrap up? I mean, you hit on a lot of wonderful things. Is there anything are they both very affectionate? Physically, like, I
Um,
was saying, "I love
my
you."
mom is, my grandfather was. My grandmother, I mean, she was extremely loving, and she was, extremely supportive, and she told you she was proud of you, and, like, hugs and kisses when you got there, but she was not as demonstrative. My grandfather was much more demonstrative, and a lot of like, outgoing people skills my mom got from her dad. Her dad could talk to anyone, and so a lot of those skills came from there. And so, but I think, my grandmother, who I called Nani, she was an introvert, and she sometimes was shy, and so that is where I often felt, um, in alignment with her, because she was
Mhm.
sometimes quieter, especially when there was a lot of family stuff going on. She was quieter, and so whereas my grandfather was always kind of loud and boisterous. And so, yeah, I think that, those, I think that I felt that she saw me, and that was a wonderful gift.
Oh my god. Well, we will end on that note because that's, like, a beautiful thing to
Oh,
say.
thank you.
That's what we all want. So, thank you so much for
Yeah.
joining me, and I wish I had
Thank you for having me. Thank you for allowing me to talk this is obviously not my usual subject of discussion for work, but it's such a pleasure to give credit to those who I think deserve it so much.
Yeah, it's really fun to talk to people about this subject because you learn so much about everyone's background, what brought them to where they are, but then also, like, you pay a little tribute to the
Yeah,
people in your life, and it's
nice.
important.
I love that.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Uh,
you.
bye. I think I might have done it. Let's see.